Drilling fluids touch just about everything in the drilling process. We're here to deconstruct the drilling process and drilling fluid concepts to provide a deeper understanding of our industry. In each episode, we'll share information, talk to interesting people, and maybe share a few stories along the way. Welcome to the Flowline, a production of AES Drilling Fluids, brought to you by Matt Offenbacher and Justin Gauthier.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Flowline. Matt and I are here for another great episode to record. We're just coming off the back of Father's Day, so hopefully all the fellas out there, all the fathers had a great Father's Day. Matt, we kind of gave a recap, but again, what was the good, bad, and hopefully not ugly, but how was Father's Day, man?
It was good. Ate a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was it like prepared for you type eating a lot, or was it?
Yeah, I didn't have to do anything. So, we went, my parents live up in Kingwood, so we went to see them, and we went to a brunch.
Yeah.
Which my dad paid for, ironically enough, but whatever, I'll take it.
What a guy.
Yeah. And then, the weather was terrible. We had to wait for like the weather to break to drive back into town to do Father's Day with my in-laws. And I went to the brewery that's by my house, and they have some good food. And so we had some fun with that, and the kids didn't go completely crazy, or
Yeah.
we weren't dealing with a lot of child-related baggage, and I got some cute, drawings and stuff out of it. So
Yeah. No, it's funny. We exchanged a little, it wasn't even really gifts, but just stuff like the kids make me. And my son, he does in school, he had a Father's Day. It was like a little book, and it was like, my father is like, blank years old. And so apparently I'm like, he actually got the age right, which is good, but he thought I was 1,036 pounds, but he was like, no, Dad, that's 136. I was like, I get, where you're going with that, but I'm actually 195. So that's the weight. And so we had to like go through it, but it's just so funny, like how our kids perceive us.
yeah.
And then it was like, my dad loves to wear gray shorts. Like some reason that stuck out in his mind. My favorite movie apparently is Sonic 3, and I don't think
Okay.
none of us have ever even watched Sonic 3. So yeah, he was kind of way off the mark. Some of the stuff he was spot on. But it's just, it's great reading that kind of stuff, and you put you see the effort of them writing, like trying to put in the right words. It melts my heart, man. It's the best thing ever. Like I'd rather that than any gift in the world, just seeing what my kids think of me. And and then at the end it's like, I love my dad because, and it's just a list of things. It's like, yeah, that's so great, man. Yeah.
I got I got a lot of compliments on 3D printing toys for my 6-year-old, which I thought
Oh,
was, yeah,
that's a
because
good
we
one.
look them up on the internet and then print them, and he really appreciates that about me.
Yeah, which
But
again, it's something you'll
was-
always
But
remember.
it was one of those, like, you could sort of tell the time when he filled it out based upon the last time we did that or whatever. It must have been really fresh in his mind.
Yeah,
But
that's cool,
yes.
man.
Well, and so you got to celebrate in a way that makes me a little jealous, because
thought
you
of
were
you.
with the family to the Astros game on Father's Day.
Yeah, it was a cool experience. It was actually almost a full house. There was like 39,000 people there, I think.
Yeah.
It was packed. I was expecting it to be busy, but not that busy. And so we got to go in. My kids wanted some Astros gear, and my son absolutely. And so part of this kind of funny. So he just absolutely loves Jordan Alvarez. Like,
Yeah.
so he plays MLB The Show on PlayStation, and he picks Astros, and every time Jordan Alvarez comes up, he normally hits a home run. And so he just absolutely loves him.
As well he should, yeah.
Right. So we go in there, and like the first thing, Dad, Alvarez jersey. Okay, buddy, get your Alvarez jersey. And I didn't know that Alvarez's hand was injured.
Yes.
And so we get in there, get our snacks, sit down. And he's like, Dad, where's Jordan Alvarez? And so I'm trying to, he's not there, maybe in the dugout. And first inning goes by, we go through they're announcing everyone up before the game, and he was absolutely infuriated that Jordan Alvarez's name. He's like, why isn't Jordan Alvarez out there? And so I'm like getting on my phone, like, let me figure out. And so in my mind, I'm like, he's probably injured. So find that out, whatever. So it was a couple innings of him pretty bummed about Jordan Alvarez not being there. But my son plays baseball, daughter softball. So like they were very interested in like, every pitch, like the count, and there's this many outs, and oh, did you see the relay? Because again, this is all the stuff I'm trying to teach them, like, hey, did you see how he fielded the ball? And like even just like the little things they picked up on. So it was really a neat experience for them, for myself included. I got to just enjoy that. they didn't once ask to leave. We stayed the entire game into the 10th inning and got to watch the winning hit. So it overall was a great experience, had a blast. And so, yeah, it was cool. And I did think of you. I was like, man, wouldn't it be funny if I ran into Matt? Because in my mind, I was like, there's certainly Matt's going to be here. But
Yeah, I was kind of tortured this weekend because I was offered tickets on Saturday, and there was a walk-off win that day too. But that was and it was one of those like I was super tied up. I went to the game on Thursday too, so like as far as
you refill.
chips I could cash in with the wife, it probably wasn't going to happen. But it was one of those. I was thinking of everybody else who got to go. But anyways, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
Um,
So, well, anyway, moving on. Hopefully, again, all the fellas out there had a good Father's Day. Over the last week, and even up until yesterday, and this morning's kind of different, but in the news, there's been a lot of geopolitical news happening, a lot of tension, which naturally impacts oil prices. And so, I thought a good topic to sort of just go over would be sort of how geopolitical risk affects oil prices, and then ultimately what that means for us, and then rig count, and just kind of go over it. And I'm sure people see the headlines, and but maybe kind of dive into it a little bit deeper to share just sort of the nuances around both of that, because it affects us big time. And depending on how long and the impact of the war, or like what they do and the retaliation, it can have some long lasting effects.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I mean, our mutual friend Josh would say, that nobody has really accounted for what you would call this geopolitical risk. It's ironically that shale being sort of the swing producer and that sort of thing in a fairly stable and mostly amenable political environment has kind of limited supply constraint risk in an area where what if a country just has internal strife or goes into conflict, which happens and has happened throughout the history of energy. So many times been the cause of conflict.
Sure.
And so where we end up is the stuff isn't really it wasn't really being taken seriously enough. And then something happens and all of a sudden there's a big rush to, oh dear, we need to reevaluate. And I think these events going on with Iran are, something that people had talked about for a long time and nobody took very seriously. But during the pandemic, it was, oh, we're moving past oil. It was weird to see politicians sort of commit to that narrative with all of the data showing that that wasn't true. Like, even you look at projections to 2050, it's still like 50% of the energy mix comes from hydrocarbons.
Sure.
Granted, nobody can tell you what's going to happen in 2050, but nobody has any realistic expectations of a huge dramatic shift in our energy supply.
Yeah.
And so with that, it went from these sort of convenient political narratives to then Russia invades Ukraine, and everyone says, oh, wait, what about energy security? And how do we ensure that we have a stable supply of energy? And Europe obviously has gone through this for a few years now, where they were getting a lot of cheap gas from Russia. It was sort of how they worked out deals with their neighbors.
Yep.
And then it became not much of an option anymore. And now we have this conflict in Iran that it's just happening now. We don't know the outcome.
Yeah.
And so but Iran has been under sanctions. But that doesn't necessarily mean their supply has been restricted per se.
Right. And for those who may not be familiar, can you describe what a sanction is? Because I feel like that word gets thrown out a lot, even in the news and, and in Twitter and stuff. But what is a sanction? Like if someone puts a sanction on.
So a sanction in general is a legal maneuver that would restrict or limit doing business in this context. So Venezuela, obviously with sort of the, dissolution of democracy there and some of the behavior of the regime, there are sanctions where you can't do business with them. You can't provide material support to their energy industry. And that's been wavered for a while, and now it's not. And with Iran, these things can go deep. It can be, all right, well, not only can you not do business with company X, but if you're a bank that facilitates a transaction for them, we will lock you out of the financial system. And it's very, very difficult if you are sanctioned by the United States to end around the banking system, because almost everything, one way or another, will be transacted through a bank in the U.S., peripherally or otherwise.
Right.
However, there have been sort of, I think, in efforts to reach a diplomatic agreement with Iran and its nuclear program and that sort of thing, there were times when you call it sanctions relief. You say, hey, we'll come to the table. We're going to waive some of this stuff for a little while. You can make more money. You can, that kind of thing. This is sort of a good faith initiative in hopes that you'll come to the table, and we understand that things could get better if we can come to an understanding. But when you're sort of selective in how you enforce that, or there's very obvious end arounds to these things, then is it really a sanction or not? And so, you can see sort of, the first Trump administration, they were very, very tight. Iran couldn't sell a lot of oil. Then the Biden administration very much looked the other way, if you just look. And then there were claims like, hey, we're ratcheting back down, and Iranian exports don't necessarily entirely suggest that. But obviously, oil is a very important aspect to their economy, and their leadership, from a stability perspective, wants to be able to sell it. And countries that are willing to go around those sanctions, particularly China and Iran, have their ways to do it. In the same way that they might buy oil from Russia, who's under sanctions, mostly using what you'd call as a dark fleet. It's vessels that are not insured or approved by Western or international organizations. Sometimes they turn off their transponder beacons. They do ship-to-ship transfers in international waters. So there's a lot of that kind of thing. And I guess kind of maybe I don't want to jump too far ahead on sort of our outline here, Justin. But
Sure.
With respect to, maybe we should run through. I mean, I don't think, if you've been sleeping under a rock, we felt like this morning we couldn't not talk about this.
Yes.
But maybe a rundown of what is happening right now between Israel and Iran.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I mean, again, I haven't dove too deep into it, but ultimately it's, there's a lot of tension back and forth. There's missiles being launched. There's this, there's that. And obviously oil price went from in the, mid 60s up to now. I think this morning it's like in the low 70s. I think it jumped up, but it's come back down a little bit. But yeah, what is happening over there for those who aren't aware, and why is oil doing what it's doing?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is the geopolitical risk. Now it's like, oh, shoot, energy is worth more. Like, who knows what's going to happen in a major oil exporter. But rolling back, a lot of the negotiations of the tension has been between Iran and its nuclear program, which Iran would say is peaceful and they're not trying to develop weapons. The Israelis are absolutely saying that is not true. They have done a lot of covert and overt things to stop progress on this weapons program. I don't think anybody's been very specific in what they've said, but in essence, it appears that Iran was very close to making some serious progress. And that was sort of when the Israelis said, we are going to attack these facilities.
Yeah.
And they were clearly very well prepared. I think they've been sort of preparing for this for a long time. And so they initiated strikes that eliminated a lot of leadership associated with weapons and military, along with weapons facilities and these nuclear facilities, research, that kind of thing.
And one thing too is when a lot of these countries go to fight, especially if they are an exporter of oil or rely on oil revenue, they'll attack infrastructure,
Yes.
which cuts off revenue streams, which then you can't fund or support your initiatives to doing what it is you're trying to do, which then takes oil off the market, right?
Yes.
So in theory,
Yeah, and there's two elements, I think, to the political chess that you're seeing. I mean, Israel, because I think it's supported by the United States, particularly with accessibility to weapons and that sort of thing, they have, I think they've run a lot of things by the United States. I think some of these things they just do, and some of these things I think they want to make sure they've got an understanding of what they're going to do.
yeah,
But, between these exchanges where Iran has launched missiles back at Israel, thankfully, shot a lot of them down, but there's people's lives are at risk. People are dying over this. This is, as much as we talk about it in sort of the chess match, like there's a real human toll to this.
yeah,
But from an infrastructure perspective, the Israelis have been very intentional, at least so far, to attack domestic facilities and by this gas processing refineries, with the argument being that these things affect internal stability in Iran. The problem is, if they were the big export facilities on an island called Karg Island near the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf, it's a very glaring target. And I think there's a lot of reason to believe that they have avoided doing anything to that because it would draw in. Now it's affecting the Chinese, the Indians. You're bringing in a lot of other people into this thing.
Okay, because I did hear on the news about them not attacking the
export infrastructure
Yeah.
has been largely left alone.
Right. Okay, because it obviously then affects everyone else, which then you get a target on your back. Like, whoa, now you're affecting all of us, not just the battle you have with your enemy there.
Yes, and there's another aspect of this where there's always been this sort of lingering threat or concern that the relatively narrow passage to get oil out of Iraq, out of the Middle East, other areas inside the Persian Gulf, is to go through this Strait of Hormuz, which is narrow enough that, with a powerful enough navy, you could wreak a lot of havoc.
Yeah.
It's also why there's a lot of like British and United States Navy assets patrolling there, is to keep the peace around there.
Right.
But, if backed into a corner, would, Iran do something like that? Once again, it starts to bring a lot of other people in. The U.S., I think, has been pretty intentional about saying this is an Israeli deal. They're going to do what they're going to do, and we're not going to, we're going to protect our people and our assets, but we're not getting involved. So that is sort of a very noteworthy thing that has been left alone when the Israel and it's a pretty crazy thing to think about, but these drones, these missiles, these bombers and everything, they're like, Iran and Israel aren't that close together. All of these flights require mid-air refueling, extra fuel tanks to get there, so you can't carry as many munitions. And Israel's hitting deep into Iran, and this is a pretty elaborate, complex thing to sustain for days and days.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're doing it. They were obviously prepared for it. So it is interesting that Israel has seemingly, and I mean, look, I know what I know from reading what I read, and I may not be getting all of my sources absolutely pure. I will share one of the more interesting things on Twitter is you can find these sort of niche people that will track and seem to know things a little bit ahead of everyone else.
Okay.
And they tend to be careful about what they say, I suspect because they have sources.
Sure.
But there is one kind of fun one, and it is the Pentagon Pizza Monitor on Twitter.
Okay.
There's 4 Domino's pizzas around the Pentagon, and they get crazy busy right before something is about to happen.
What?
And it's basically like all these people at the Pentagon have to work late.
Oh.
And they're ordering pizzas
Okay.
to stay at the office. And so about an hour before all this started, when it first happened, all of them were like, when you search a restaurant on Google and it says like busier than usual.
Yeah.
They were like 5 or 10 times busier than usual.
What?
And and then it would be like, okay, something's going down,
That is hilarious. What a signal.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just think it's fascinating from like a data science perspective.
Yeah.
Like you can try and hide, but there's going to be these unintended or like secondary pieces of evidence that you can piece together and sort of triangulate.
Yeah.
Without specifics, what might be happening.
Wow. That is really cool.
But yeah, all that being said, I think there's a lot of intent here. Israel said this thing could go on for a few weeks, but nobody knows how far it could go. Nobody knows what Iran is going to do back. Nobody knows if the Iranian regime is going to remain stable. So you've got all these unknowns. It may be that when more information becomes clear, what you're going to end up with is the price of oil goes back down, at least to some degree, when it's like, okay, there's no more risk of this getting worse, perhaps.
Right.
But nobody knows what does Yogi Berra say? Predictions are hard, especially about the future.
Right.
So we're sort of kind of watching this, and a lot of it's happening at night. So when we're late in the afternoon or whatever, all of a sudden you hear of all this activity. There's all these videos coming out of
Yeah.
impacts of things, and news can sometimes be slow and sometimes be fast and sometimes can be fake.
Sure.
So, but all that being said, it is a very clear and scripted geopolitical scenario that if creates an increase in the price of oil. Who knows if that price stays up? But you sort of have these, 2 weeks ago we were talking about how OPEC was increasing all this production. Where is it going to come from? And rigs are dropping, things are tough, and fast forward and we're looking around and saying, I mean, these are healthy oil prices. If they were to stick around, would we see more activity in the U.S.? Would we see different behavior from operators and sort of their drilling plans? And I think the answer is yes, but obviously a lot of that is this sort of a sustained thing.
Yeah.
I think in the interim, what we see is operators, oil and gas companies, a lot of what they might do is what you would call hedging. So they'll sign a contract to sell oil at a particular price in the future, which can be very helpful because it's sort of like, I know how many dollars I get. And sometimes that's where people are like, this is weird. Like the price of oil plummeted today and nobody did anything. And I was like, well, that action may happen a little more slowly because of how most operators, 6 months out have half their production paid for at a much higher price anyways. They're not affected. You don't necessarily hedge all of your production, but you might hedge some of it, and you might hedge it at different prices sort of to give you some stability, to insure against the downside. But if things go up, you're not 100% hedged, so you can catch the upside. And I mean, our buddy Josh, who's been on a couple of times, he can be fairly critical if you hedge too much and you don't catch an upside, or you hedge too little and don't protect yourself from volatility. That's part of managing your assets.
Right.
So, does that help operators now say, look, last week that curve 6 months from now was at 60. If it's bent back upwards, like, let me get this while I can, just because it's higher than what I've been planning the rest of my year for.
No kidding.
And those are all extra dollars in my pocket. So yeah, a couple of weeks ago, we are just talking about how much more can OPEC put on the market. Now we're talking about, what are we going to increase production even more?
Yeah. No, that's it's fascinating because even I think over like Thursday and Friday, I thought I saw again the headlines come roaring in, and it's like, could we see $100 oil again? And and then people are like, oh my goodness, where are we? So it's just like this crazy up and down. But I think and you kind of made a note there with looking at the fundamentals, like all of this. Again, the price swings right now haven't been just because of like a huge supply deficit or all of a sudden like demand like roared in like the last week. It's a lot of this like anticipation of what could happen. But looking at, you mentioned inventories remain low. I think from a supply side, there's a little bit of still upward pressure on oil prices if you look sort of in the next 3 to 6 months towards the end of the year. So can you talk a little bit about that? And then, you mentioned crude draw season, what that might be, and looking at like the actual supply and demand, sort of not really including the geopolitical, but obviously that kind of piles on top of it afterwards.
Yes. I mean, I think there was a huge, the head scratcher was, okay, oil is dropping to 60 or whatever. OPEC has announced these increases. One, they announced some of the increase. They've announced them, kind of monthly, and they didn't actually meet their increased quota of the first announced increases, which was kind of okay, do they even have the capacity? Like, is this all nominal? The other thing is global crude inventories are at about a 5-year low. And there is an argument to be made that, okay, with shale and with other things, like you can bring stuff on a lot more quickly, so you don't need as much inventory, right? It's it's sort of like if you have high turn rates, you don't need to sit on stuff. Like how we would handle our chemicals. But it is a head scratcher to say, okay, we don't have as much oil available if there was a disruption, just sitting in a tank somewhere or on a vessel floating out in the ocean or what have you. And the other part of it is there's kind of like build season and draw season. And so you build up your storage, and then kind of draw season is you get in the peak of summer, and in the US and other places, people are driving a lot more. There's a lot more air travel. You need energy for air conditioning. And so when you see that consumption, you draw down your stockpiles. And the question is, how low do you draw them down relative to how much you can bring back in? And right now, at least, when you'd expect a little bit of a build, they're seeing declines. And so it's like, okay, like this is upward pressure probably, because at some point someone's going to look around and say, we're taking out more than we're putting in, and normally we'd be banking.
Yeah.
So there's sort of a seasonal effect there that we're also in the middle of.
Right.
So I think, there's always these moving parts. This is a loud piece of news. Who knows how long it sticks around for? I guess, you and I, what is it like? I just remember, my dad, all the uncertainty and everything in the oil field, which made me swear I'd never get involved. And now we're in the place where, you hear the jokes of millennials, like I'm onto my like third world-ending cataclysm, between like the financial crisis, the pandemic, like all these other things happening, where I think on the downside, it's tough because we see how hard it is for folks. And I think the wisest leaders have said, like, put your head down, take care of what you can control.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking like on the upside, just philosophically on the upside, like, yes, think about how you can take advantage of it. If it's something that's, beneficial to your business or your, that sort of thing. But at the same time, like, you probably don't want to overreact too much either. Like, keep your head down. The good things will come, so.
And when you look at the oil field, again, it's so cyclical, right? And so, you look at the U.S., which majority of the folks listening are, you got rig counts down, frac spreads down, oil production's kind of hovering about the same. It's not growing, it's not declining. DUC counts down. So naturally, I think the direction it has to go is up at some point here soon. The Middle East, I think rig count's slowly falling off as well. And so, again, the oil demand for the world, like we are consuming a lot of oil, and the U.S. is, one of the biggest producers in the world. So we're going to have to get back to, I wouldn't say drill, baby drill, but I think the outlook from here over the next, say, year or two is pretty good. I wouldn't say we're going to go on a huge rip and, everyone's going to be having $100 bills falling out of their pockets like the good old days at some point. But I don't think we're in for this like crash and burn for any length of time, unless we experience a black swan event. But in that point, no one knows what's going on.
Yes.
But all
predictions
signals
are hard, especially about the future.
Yeah, but the signals as it stands today is I think folks can, like you said, keep your head down, work hard, and if anything, I think activity is going to slowly start creeping up. At least that's my crystal ball projection. So have faith, folks, and yeah. Anything else, Matt, before we let things go?
I'd say on oil prices, like, yeah, I think we all just yearn for stability. I think most of us don't want $100 oil, and we don't want $50 oil. We just want something we can, make a living off of and not, toss and turn at night.
Yeah.
But I know you would feel the same way, but I guess just a hope that this does get resolved. As much as it's like a breath of fresh air. I had the fortune of working in Israel to be involved in some of the gas wells, and got to experience a little bit of the country. And the tension there is, you can feel it.
Wow.
Even during peacetime, but even during, it's the only place I've gone to where the safety moment, and I've had safety moments about kidnappings. I've been into a lot of places, but like our safety moment was, hey, there was a rocket attack. You need to know where your shelters are. Like IDF jets were scrambled and eliminated the position, but they don't know if they like got the guys who were doing it. And it's like, I'm just trying to go to work,
Yeah.
And
That's wild.
but there's a lot of that stuff doesn't necessarily make the news. But the other thing is, I have friends who have family over there that like, I think it's easy to distance ourselves from these things. But you know, it was a bit surreal to see, because I've driven through Tel Aviv, like just to see the skyline at night and everything happening, and to know that, some of my friends who are Jewish, for example, it's a, your parents retire and they go back and live there, and that's like something that they aspire to do, and now I got to stay on top of mom and dad, like, they're older, I can't reach them all the time. So just sort of having a line in on that, and then, I can't even imagine what it's like in Iran. And I have Iranian friends from, when I lived in Azerbaijan, but soccer buddies and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I had friends from Iraq, and guess why they were in Azerbaijan? Because of the 2003, they had to leave. So there's just real human stuff with all this. And it's always in the back of my mind, even when we sort of talk about the strategy and the tactics.
Yeah.
So I think that's the one thing I want to leave with is just, obviously I'm praying for a peaceful resolution. The sooner the better. And,
Of course.
Hopefully something good can come of this that brings more stability and more prosperity to the people over there.
Yeah. No, what a great way to close out. And with that being said, everyone, if you have any thoughts or you want to chime into the conversation, by the time this gets released, I'm sure a lot of things will have happened. But nonetheless, again, pay attention, understands how it affects you, and at the very least, continue to subscribe and listen to the Flowline, because we like to, share what's going on, especially how it affects us here in the drilling fluids world. Be sure to connect with the AES Fluids page on LinkedIn. There's a ton of great content being put out there. Check out the website. It continuously is updated. The YouTube channel, our tech tips, a lot of good technical information for those continuing to just want to learn about drilling fluids. And you can reach out to Matt or I if you have a question for a question or an idea for a show. That's where a lot of the best episodes come from, is just your ideas and thoughts and questions on things. So with that being said, everyone, take care, be safe, and until next time, cheers.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Please tune in next week for another exciting episode of The Flowline. And remember, may your returns always be full and your trips always smooth. Views expressed in this program belong to participants and not their employees. The program is for informational purposes only and cannot take the place of seeking professional advice. Copyright AES Drilling Fluids.